look at a video by Dan McClellan. He's this fascinating progressive Mormon. He's been building a following on YouTube, and I think he's primarily on TikTok. He's a really fascinating guy because he holds to a progressive view. He holds to critical theory in how it's to be applied to hermeneutics and interpretation, but he identifies as a Mormon. So that's really fascinating stuff. And he's an Old Testament scholar, so no doubt about that. So he's got the creds. But some of his interpretations, I think, are suspect on how we should interpret the Old Testament. This video in particular, responding to apologetics about God's violence. Dan is not a fan of apologetics. I think one of his taglines is something like data over dogma. Unfortunately for Dan, he is an apologist, whether he likes to be or not. It's what he does. He defends beliefs, positions, and so in that regard, he's an apologist. This one, we're going to go super deep. So you gotta follow along with me. This will be 4 layers deep. There's a guy who made a video, and this other fellow, Josh Benson, I think his name, does this response video to these Bible verses. And Dan's gonna critique Josh on how to interpret these passages. Now, sometimes Dan's criticisms of Josh are warranted. Other times they are not. I, Dr. J, am going to look at Dan's critiques of Josh's comments of this other guy. I don't really like going this many layers deep, but I feel like we're going to knock out a lot of Bible passages here from this 10-minute video that Dan has made. So bear with me as we look at each verse. So here we go.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. The fit for this video is black and white version of Jim Lee's X-Men number 11.
All right, Dan, I have a question for you. How many t-shirts do you have? Because it's like every video, there's a new t-shirt. I really want to know how many t-shirts are in your wardrobe, and do you get people donating these shirts? How can I get t-shirts that I can showcase on my videos? That's my first question for you, Dan.
Let's take a look at a video.
I decided to let the Lord speak to me as I read through the Bible. I started to get really disturbed by some of the things that I was noticing.
So Bob here is having trouble with some of the crazier
So Bob is that guy, and this is Josh. Here we go.
Verses in the Old Testament, and even more so reconciling how a good and just God could be involved with such crazy things. So I'm going to make a video here responding to the verses that he has.
All right, let's see it.
That's his catchphrase.
That's 1 Samuel 15:3.
Here we see God commanding the Israelites to destroy Amalek. Now, it's important to remember when we see God killing people in the Old Testament, there's usually a reason behind it.
So this is pretty standard apologetic fare for genocide, and it is utterly pathetic. It is an attempt to make it okay for Israel to go kill every last man, woman, child, suckling infant, and fetus in the womb. And the reasons are fabricated. None of this is in the text at all. At most, the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 14:48 are represented as plunderers. Israel is far worse. But we actually have an explicit reason given in 1 Samuel 15:2 for why Israel is to go engage in cherem, or ritual slaughter, sacrifice, genocide. And what's that reason? God remembers that centuries before their ancestors fought against Israel when they were coming up out of Egypt. That's why they tell the Kenites, hey, get out of here. We're not after you. Because they were kind to Israel when Israel was coming up out of Egypt. These are people who had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with what they claim their ancestors did centuries before. But even the story of the genocide of the Amalekites is just propaganda. It's a way to set up Saul so that he can be represented as not obeying Adonai in all things, so that he can be dismissed, the kingdom can be taken from him and given to David, who, by the way, later on goes and kills all living things among the Amalekites, not because God told him to, not because they were being violent, but because he didn't want to leave any survivors or witnesses who could go report that he was betraying the Philistines. So there's no excuse for this genocide, and this attempt to excuse it is absolutely pathetic.
Okay, wow, do I have some thoughts on Dan's take on this? You can see he's passionate. He refers to this sort of defense, this apologetic, as pathetic. Dan's got a serious problem in his hermeneutic here, because on the one hand, he wants to critique Josh Benson as defending genocide. But here's the problem. Dan himself recognizes that the OT passages are propaganda. He calls them propaganda. The shrewd interpreter of the Bible will recognize these are exaggeratory or even embellished claims of military victories. So let's look at 1 Samuel 15. So here's the verse in question. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Now the question is this an exhaustive, detailed command from Yahweh, or is it exaggerated language? We can see here that what takes place is a military battle. They allow the Kenites to depart. And then, look at verse 8. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive and devoted to destruction all the people at the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, of the oxen, and fattened calves. He would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction. You see here that this is, as Dan admits, propaganda. Why? Well, they say it's to depict Saul in a certain way. Did Yahweh actually command Saul to go do all of these things? Or when Yahweh commanded it, was it exaggerated military language? Because there's two ways of interpreting this passage. You can think that the command was literal and exhaustive, or that it was simply a command to go to battle. And those are two different things, because the Kenites departed, so that's already an exception. So exceptions are allowed. So we can see it's already non-literal. Now this concept, this theme, we see especially with the conquest account in the book of Joshua. And we see the same type of language. And guess what? When you read Joshua closely, you can see that there were military battles that were won, but that there were still people. Why in the book of Judges are there problems all over the place? Because they did not kill everybody, even though they said they killed everybody. All doesn't always mean all. All can be a general all, not a meticulous, exhaustive all. So Dan says it's pathetic to interpret this as genocide, but what if we don't interpret it as genocide? What if haram is to push out the people from the land, and that it doesn't require or necessitate a meticulous killing even of the child and infant, meticulously speaking? It seems like Dan wants to have his cake and eat it too, so I don't think that's fair to say it's a pathetic defense. I think Dan should help Josh out a little better here with what the text actually means and how we should understand it in light of the hints and clues in the text itself, so we can better understand what transpired back then. I don't think we should hold it against Yahweh that Yahweh commanded genocide.